Hey guys, welcome back to another whiteboard chat, and today we're going to talk about the autonomic nervous system and why it matters. So I did another story poll, and the other topic was overreaching and overtraining, but I thought it would be appropriate to do this first since the two are really tied into one another. So we'll cover this first, we'll do that next. Alright, so the title is actually kind of deceiving, I guess, because I've have this chart here of the nervous system kind of in its entirety, so it's not the A and S or autonomics, only this little spot down here. So going to be a lot more to it, but I want to explain why the autonomic nervous system is so important. All right, so first off, we will start, let's just go through this chart. I want everyone to kind of understand how the nervous system works in a nutshell, what the firing pattern is, and again, you're looking at an entire feedback loop here, so let's talk about that a little bit. Now first, we're starting here, CNS. Everyone's heard of the CNS, right? Central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. That's where a lot of it's going to start, right? And then we're going to start go through this signaling pathway. We're going to go to the peripheral nervous system, cranial and spinal nerves, all right? So these nerves are going to, it's spina, all right? Spinal. Which is going to be communication between the CNS and the rest of the body, essentially, right? So again, it's the body with another, what seems like unnecessary signaling pathway. We could just go from here to here, right? Well, next we're going to come down to the motor or efferent system. Impulses from the CNS to muscles and glands. Now this is where we start to get into voluntary and involuntary functions. Somatic nervous system, impulses from CNS to muscles, that's a voluntary nervous system. So that's things that you can control, movements that you control, so on and so forth, right? Then we move over to the autonomic nervous system. Auto, meaning it's involuntary, it's automatic. This is things like smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glands, etc. The impulses from CNS to involuntary functions. So once we get all the way down here, we're talking about involuntary functions. We're talking about things internally, digestion, different glands, your heart, all that good stuff. Okay. Also digestive motility, all that, the contractions like food moving through, all that's going to be in the autonomic nervous system. And that's why it's so important, because all of these functions that are occurring are involuntary. However, other things that you do outside of that impact how these functions operate and how well how well the autonomic nervous system operates because of how stressed your body might be, or how taxed your overall nervous system might be, or how disrupted the signaling pathway could be. So you can't control these things. So if you are interrupting the signaling pathway or overall taxing the entirety of the system too much, these functions may not work as well, right? So you go over here, and these are some terms that you guys might be familiar with, guys and gals. SNS, sympathetic nervous system. PSNS, parasympathetic nervous system. So SNS being fight or flight, that's stimulating, right? PSNS being rest and digest. These are repair, column, bookkeeping, all that good stuff, like all these functions that need to occur for you to live and do, for everything to work internally. Now, why, like I said, it is very important that we're not disrupting this whole chain, because this system is automatic. Now, if we start disrupting this chain through too much stress, for example, that's when we start noticing an imbalance in SNS to PSNS. A lot of people will end up sympathetically driven, right? They're too much sympathetic, not enough parasympathetic. So these functions that go on in the parasympathetic nervous system, like digestion, that's a common one, right, are disrupted. So why do people have digestive issues when they're stressed? It's mainly because of this, right? And it could be because of a number of other things too, but this is kind of why that begins to occur, because that system's disrupted. Now, we'll come back to that a little bit, but let's move back up to the sensory or afferent. This is impulses from the receptors back to the CNS, so we're going back up, right? Back up in the nervous system, and then we restart. So think of it as, any of you that might have watched the, let's see which videos, like the thyroid video or the hypogonadism video, like all these things, how we saw that everything works in a signaling pathway. We're starting here, we have a need for something, signaling cascade comes down, it gets, it's saying, okay, we have this and this and this going on, it signals back and tells the CNS that we need, whatever function, right? So that's why it's working in that feedback loop. Now, like I said, when I focus primarily on this autonomic nervous system because it is something that we cannot control. I guess we could look at it the other way and focus on the things that we can control, and that would help this. But again, we need to make sure that we're doing a few things, right? So let's talk about training, sleep, digestion, stress, mood. I'm not going to go into depth on any of these things, but let's, we want to look at how do all these accumulate and impact this system. So again, we want to be in a parasympathetic state far more often than we want to be in a sympathetic state. So we want to be in a rest and digest state. We want our heart rate down to normal. We want our breathing normal. We want digestive motility working. We want all this stuff working as it should be and not disrupted. All right. So when we are overtrained or overreached, or we are lacking sleep, or we have poor sleep quality, we have digestive issues, but that would be effect, not a cause. Stress and mood. Now I put mood on here because I'm going to come over and talk about neurotransmitters a little bit. There are different neurotransmitters that primarily help these systems function, or primarily are a result of functions of these systems. Okay, so primarily in that autonomic nervous system, we have a few different neurotransmitters. Sympathetic nervous system, you're going to be dealing with things like dopamine, epinephrine. Epinephrine's probably considered the primary one, and we're eventually going to end up with, let's see if I can spell this right. I think that's how you spell adrenaline. Yeah, so we'll eventually end up over here with adrenaline. All right. So we want that for training, right? Those big top sets, we want that. We want that for running from the police, maybe. Not that, don't do that. Running from a wild animal or somebody chasing you, maybe, things like that. We want that to happen. And then obviously, there are certain aspects of the system that do make us feel good, because adrenaline and dopamine and these neurotransmitters tend to make you feel good, right? They heighten your senses, they heighten your mood, right? That's why, it's part of the reason why things like caffeine, make you feel good, right? Because they start up here, but they're going to signal all the way down and put you in more of a sympathetically driven state and end up with this neurotransmitter released, and you're going to feel good, okay? Now we move over to the PSNS, so the parasympathetic, primarily going to be acetylcholine. So you may have heard of acetylcholine and things like cognitive type products or nootropics or, things like that. You may see it in several different forms. Choline in and of itself, so choline comes in, you can get it in all kinds of different forms. The acetylcholine, choline bitartrate, there's alpha GPC, there's a lot of different forms that it does come in. All right, but what we're looking at here is acetylcholine. So it's an interesting dynamic because the parasympathetic nervous system does add an element of focus and concentration and what have you. It's not just about being stimulated all the time. So there is a balance. That's why When you're overstimulated, you might actually have a hard time concentrating, and you might get anxious and things like that. You're too far unbalanced here. So, consider that when you're looking at like stimulants for training, right? Or stimulants, or like a nootropic, or a stimulant for a high productivity period or something, right? You might not necessarily want to be overstimulated. Felt that feeling where you're overstimulated and you're definitely heightened, but you can't concentrate, you're jittery, you're not focused, right? And there's that good middle ground that's smoother and focused and makes you feel good. That's where, that's probably where you want to function. And that's because you're balancing this. Okay, so again, how you affect this nervous system is going to be an accumulation of a lot of things. I'm going to talk about that more on the actual overtraining and overreaching video. But I wanted everyone to kind of understand what the heck the autonomic nervous system was and why it was important. And I also think it's important to understand how this whole system works as a whole. We need to start here at the top. We need to care for our nervous system with all of these, all of these things, especially, these two and this one. If you do these things, if you manage stress, if you don't overtrain, if you sleep sufficiently and have high sleep quality, and don't, abuse stimulants or have high emotional or psychological stress during the day, perhaps you're probably going to be all right around in this. This feedback loop is probably going to work pretty efficiently. So that's the gist of it. I know that was a little bit shorter video, but I wanted to get that out there and talk about that before I got into some of the more practical stuff with overreaching and talk about how that affects everything. So I hope that's helpful, and we'll talk to you guys next time.